Hello! I know it's been a while since you've seen me in this format, but I've decided I want to throw my hat back into the YouTube game. And what is very popular at the minute on YouTube? Video essays and dissections of media. And at the minute, while I am working on a video on Final Fantasy 16 and how I see it as a very underrated game, um, for now, I want to talk about Drag Race, as it is one of my hyperfixations at the minute, and Global All Stars is about to come out, so there's going to be a lot of attention on the franchise. Um, in particular, what I'm going to look at is why specific queens for Global All Stars were chosen to represent their country, who I think could have been alternative choices, but also why these queens make such good choices for their countries. Um, Before I get into it, I want to preface this immediately by saying there are some franchises where I haven't finished the season or I've only seen one episode of, and those are namely Brazil, France, and Philippines. And I'm not going to comment on those queens because I don't know their full story, their trajectory, etc. What I will say off the top from what I know, Miranda looks cookie and fun. I'm really glad they chose Soa to represent France, given France's cookie relationship with Reyes. And in the couple of episodes I've seen of Philippines, Eva the Queen was one of the queens that stood out for me a lot. So I do think they're all good choices. I don't want to say any more on that. But as a result of not watching those franchises, I'll give alternative choices for countries I have seen, namely Holland and Spain. Um, but when it comes to what I'm looking for in this, I think it's very important to talk about the fact that I think it's much more important, especially for the first ever Global All Stars, for queens to have been chosen for them to represent their country's idea of drag much more than having the most competitive person. And you'll see that a lot when I talk for each of the queens. It's not why I think they're going to win or why I think they're going to be the best competitor ever. It's no, why I think they make such a good representative for their country's idea of drag. From my perspective, anyway, I'm an Irish person that moved to England. I don't have a lot of cultural background or knowledge on the history of drag in most of these countries. It's mostly going to be what I've taken from the respective franchises and more of the cultural identity of those countries as a whole. Before we also get into this as well, I do want to set off a cutoff point for the seasons I'll be looking at for each of the contestants. So, for example, I think the latest contestants in the show are Mexico, Germany, and Brazil, all respectively. Their contestants were came from the latest franchise, so that's going to be the points I'll be looking before then. So, for example, I won't be looking at, say, UK5 because that came out after those points, even though I think Kate Butch would have been an incredible representation, or Belgium 2, or Canada 4, etc. So, rumors for this season started coming out a year ago ish. I'll try my best to abide by that benchmark. So, going along with the Meet the Queens video, let's go through the queens in the alphabetical order of their names. So, starting off, we have Alyssa Edwards, and Alyssa Edwards is such an excellent choice for this season. I think for Global All Stars, as I mentioned before, you need good representation for the country more so than just the best competitor. And while nearly every queen on this season is going to be a finalist, um, the US being a flagship season, I think it was so much more important for them to have someone that's iconic, that's able to stand out against hundreds of other queens. And for the US, a loud dancing pageant queen with catchphrases that are still repeated to this day. Just an excellent choice. By no means do I mean this as an insult at all. Alyssa is a great competitor. Like, if you look at All Stars 2, it's hard to deny that she should have been in the finale, but I'm not opening should haves or could haves. But for her to be able to stand out so easily when there are so many US queens, it is just impressive at this point. Like, I don't want to consider queens to come back for their fourth chance or anything like that. And I honestly can't think of a better choice than Alyssa to represent the US. Everyone knows about back rules and rigor mortis, and within the US seasons and beyond, Alyssa is just a presence. She is always around through her Alyssa-isms, her catchphrases, etc. Yes, she has been back for All Stars, but she's also been back as a choreographer. She's constantly quoted, and being loud and so over the top. Alyssa's just such a good choice. I honestly don't think there's anyone that would be a better choice than Alyssa, than potentially even some of the winners or Katja. And that is a huge bar to raise, the fact that she is giving the winners of the show runs for their money in terms of most iconic queens, to be honest. So, Alyssa, excellent. Okay, so next we have Athena Likis from Belgium, and I'm not going to lie, Belgium is easily one of my favourite franchises across all of Drag Race, and I could easily make a strong argument for nearly every contestant that's been on Belgium, but thankfully I don't have to think about Season 2. Thank Christ. So with Season 1, I think it's only fair to narrow it down. I don't think you could go wrong with any of the top 4. Excluding Drag Queen, because I don't think it's fair to consider winners in this conversation. But in terms of Athena, Mademoiselle Boop, and Susan from Grindr, I think any of them would have been an excellent choice. My personal pick would have been Susan. There's just something very endearing about her character. I think she was very underrated. For example, she could have won the top 4 challenge, which was the speeches, which I think is going to I'll talk about in a bit. The speeches challenge is very important for the character of all of these queens. And she was just such a positive presence on screen that I just want to see her back. I want to see her do well. And she done well the first time. With Mademoiselle Boop, she was the professional rep with a reputation. She was the Rita Baga-esque presence on this season. And I don't feel like she ever done that bad on the season. Her snatch game was great, which again is another challenge that Susan also could have won. And she just had this kind of aura around her where she knew the country's drag scene and was able to put that into her work. And finally, we have Athena, who started off the season strong. Her talent show is a comedy skit with fire, and it is so good. It's so good. And she also has an extremely moving and powerful makeover. Athena has this model couture around her, and she, while being able to have the fashions for the season, she was also able to let the audience in and show her vulnerable side with the makeover. And each of these queens have their strengths, but they're also pretty versatile. And that's why I think all 3 of them could have made a good choice. And I do think this is most exemplified in the speeches challenge that I mentioned before. At the top 4, challenge, they were asked to do political speeches about the state of Belgium, and no one done bad. All of the speeches were incredibly moving. They all had an incredibly unique perspective. Susan being Flemish and talking about her position in Belgium and the fact that there was a Franco preferred position in society. Boop discussing difficulties with autism and how that's changed her worldview, while Athena was coming in talking about immigration and what it's like to be an outsider in a country that you've spent a significant period of your life in. Each of these queens are so talented. They all have a unique view on Belgium, and any of them could have represented their country. Okay, so skipping on from Evil the Queen, since, as I mentioned before, I haven't watched Philippines in full, let's move on to Gala Varo. Gala Varo is a performer. She can dance, she can do tricks, she has that kind of flourish and Mexican flair to her that's very extravagant. And yeah, Gala Varo's performance style is really passionate, really good. And if you notice on this season, this is a season of performers. This is a season of dancers. I think, judging by the cast, we're going to have a lot of performance-based challenges. And Gala Varo is going to excel. She has a flair that does really well to represent Mexican drag. There's only one other queen on her season I may have thought would have been a better choice. But this isn't to say Gala is a bad choice. Not only is she a good dancer, but she can design stuff. The denim challenge, the Levi's episode, she was top 2 in. Yeah, she lip synced a couple of times, but her lip sync with the bald camp against Argenis it's one for the ages. It's so good. Gala Varo is another person that from the start you were like, this queen's going far. So I'm pretty happy for her to represent the Mexican franchise. The only other queen I would say maybe would have been a better choice, in my opinion, is Matraca. And that's only because she put her Mexican heritage into every runway she done, her makeup style, everything. When you look at Matraca, you see my perspective, from my position anyway, you see a Mexican performer, very proud of her culture, just full on, ready to represent. And I know it's going to be a bit cliche to choose the literal fan favorite who got that award on the show. But Matraca is another one that I would love to see back. I think the only reason why Gala Varo may have been a better choice is Matraca could be a bit quiet, and even though she could dance, she could perform. I think this was really exemplified in the finale, where for the final lip sync, everyone was going over the top, melodrama, everything. And Matraca actually played it a bit reserved, which was a different perspective. I think it made her stand out, but I don't think it made her stand out for the right reason. And I think maybe for a cast that is this loud, having someone a bit quieter like Matraca in comparison to someone loud and over the top like Gala Varo may not have been the smartest choice. So Gala Varo is great representation. I'm really happy to see her. I cannot wait for her to be in the top 2 in an episode and just lip sync and demolish. You have no idea how excited I am for that. So now we have Kitty Scott Claus, the UK's representative. As I'm sure some of you know, drag has been around forever in the UK in the state of pantomime. And if you want to represent UK drag, you need a campy loud comedy queen. While I could see a lot of people making arguments for, say, Bimini or Taste to come back, I think if you want to exemplify UK drag, you need a panto queen. And this is why I'm kind of sad that I can't discuss UK5, because Kate Butch would have been that queen to choose. But Katie is also just such a good representation of that over-the-top acting style, being able to volley with the audience, playing around with a wink and a nudge, and being able to have that kind of brashy personality that we have seen rewarded shockingly little on UK Drag Race. Funny what happens when the country's drag competition is hosted by people not from that country. We'll get onto that in the next entry. I do think from the first 4 seasons, Kitty is easily the correct choice. Okay, so moving on to Kween Kong, I think there's a bit of ground we need to cover before actually talking about Kween Kong. And the first thing is, Rue clearly does not like the Down Under franchise, since he wasn't there to film season 1 and he pieced out after season 3. So, giving the benefit of the doubt, let's look at all the reasonable choices that we have anyway. And I don't think there's a lot in 3 seasons. So with season 1, there's... Okay. Season 1 was a mess, but not in terms of, the judging, the rigging, etc., the things that people like to claim about. Season 1 has really bad racial optics, in the fact that the 2 queens of color were the first 2 eliminated, where the second eliminated queen, who was white, came back to the competition for seemingly no reason. 2 of the top 4 had issues with racism in the past, and the frontrunner of the competition, who was called out on stage for doing blackface, gave the most placid apology ever, where she was like, "It was a different time. 6 months ago, 6 months ago, me didn't know that blackface was a bad thing. I don't see race. I'm sorry, blah, blah, blah." The bitch was allowed to continue, and in fact, the person that called her out in the workroom, being like, "How the fuck did you ever think blackface was okay?" was eliminated that episode. So, yikes. While one of the other top 2 had the, is it Gollywog dolls? The fucking racist things, which again is very much like, I didn't know blackface was a bad thing. I didn't know that this was a racist caricature. It was just a doll from my childhood. So excluding that, the only other person in the top 4 was Art Simone, the previously brought back contestant, who, considering everything that went on about her elimination and returning, I don't think Art left a good impression on the fans, and they wouldn't be happy to see her back. Moving down, RuPaul clearly fucking hates electroshock, so wouldn't be chosen. And while I would like to see someone like etc. etc. or Maxi Shields come back, I'm not sure that they done well enough in the competition, or had a over-the-top strong personality like someone like Alyssa to come back to represent their country. So the only other queen from season 1 who I do think would be even eligible to be chosen would be Anita Wiglet, and she came back. So, and before I talk about season 2, because there's a couple of queens from season 2 I want to talk about, let's do season 3 really quick. Season 3 was a mess, purely from a production standpoint. Production did not care that season anymore. They were having them doing a girl groups challenge where they were swinging bikes over their heads. They were having them do a makeover where they had to make over dogs and make the owners look like the dogs. I love Down Under Season 3, but it is not a good season. And unfortunately, Isis Avis Loran just dominated that season so much that other personalities in that season didn't get as much of a chance to stand out. Gabrielle Labucci, I think, would be one of the other possible choices, but she didn't do great in the competition. And RuPaul, as I said, doesn't like Down Under. Moving on to season 2. A great season. Kween Kong is the best choice from Down Under to come back, 100%. Given everything I mentioned about the racial optics of season 1, having an Aboriginal queen come and represent Down Under is the least they could do. And I want to see Kween Kong do well, and I want to see her dominate. Kween Kong has such a powerful energy. Like, I mean this in the most flattering way possible. I would hate to get into an argument with Kween Kong because Kween Kong has a power, and it is engaging, it's strong, and I love it. In terms of other queens from season 2 of Down Under, Hanaconda would have been another amazing choice, but sadly she came back for UK versus the World. Another queen who I personally like is Beverly Kills. I don't think she done well on the season, but she's a queen where her presence after the show, I think, has been pretty good and pretty consistent. Through social media, she's demonstrated how hilarious she can be, how, yeah, she's a comedy queen, she's a dancer, and I don't think we got to see that on the show. And bouncing back to season 3, another queen I think had a really good presence after the show came out is Ivory Glaze. She is a professional wig maker now. She also has a really big social media presence. And she was the first queen to be told she was going to lip sync for her life, and she passed out instead. And that's iconic. And I want to see that back. So, moving on. Miranda, not going to talk about. So now we have Nehellenia. And she was one of 2 choices for Italy. And before I talk about Nehellenia herself, let's talk about that other choice, who was Farida Kant. Now, the conversation when you bring up Farida is always, she should have won, she dominated the season, Elektra shouldn't have won with no challenge wins. And I don't think that's a very fair conversation to have for either of those queens, because it's, while yes, it is raising Farida as like, oh, you were the best competitor, it's not putting a spotlight on what she done well in. It's saying, you should have got this. It's putting an emphasis on the fact that she didn't win in the end. And Farida has the high fashion. She is that fashion element of Italy. She is that couture queen. Her makeover is probably my favorite makeover of all time. If you haven't seen it, please watch it. But in saying that, I don't think it's fair to be like, you should have won this season, so let's bring you back. Because we saw that happen this year with Kenna Minaj, and that didn't go well because she had so much pressure on her that when we saw her in the reunion, she was like, I done so fucking shit this season. It was embarrassing. And it's like, please don't put that pressure on another queen. And also, let's talk about Elektra for a second. 1, Elektra done good in nearly every challenge. It is a shame that Italy only had 1 high placement, because I think if it had to, Electra would have been that other high placement nearly every episode. Um, Also, Electra should have won Snatch Game. If they let Electra win Snatch Game, none of these conversations would have happened, and people would have accepted her as a winner. Um, but the much more important point, a big part that was emphasized of Italia One's prize for the winner was to be a representative for Mac. And everyone likes to point out, oh, Electra won all the mini challenges, so she gave Lucy LaDuca a reason to be happy. The reason why that actually matters is Mac ran every single mini challenge. Every mini challenge was make yourself look good with these MAC products in the dark, or do this with these MAC products, or let's see you be a representative for MAC. So Electra winning every single one of those mini challenges was kind of cementing, yes, she would be a really good MAC ambassador and would really work with the prize that they were giving out on Italia 1. And that's a point I never see brought up when talking about Italia 1, is the fact that Electra was what they were looking for. I understand that she didn't win any of the maxi challenges, even though, as I said, she deserved to win Snatch Game. She won what the main sponsors of the show were running. Every single episode. Okay, rant over. Let's get back to the actual conversation at hand. Nehellenia. I fucking love this bitch. I love Nehellenia so much. When I think of Italians, I think of very loud and camp and over-the-top dramatic. And guess what Nehellenia is? We talk about Electra winning mini challenges. Nehellenia was strapped to a chair spinning upside down while being asked questions about the Zodiac because Chiara Francini was bored one day, and she was also doing her makeup while spinning hula hoops while having a screaming match with Chiara again. Nehellenia is so over the top camp, it's hysterical. And I know she is going to do well on the comedy challenges in this season because she is going to start shouting at RuPaul, telling RuPaul to shut up while screaming, and RuPaul is going to die. A lot of people, I think, are sleeping on Nehellenia because not a lot of people have watched Italia too. And I am calling it right now. Nehellenia is making it to the end. I know Nehellenia is going to be at that finale as one of the competitors, and I cannot wait for it. And I know you may look at this and be like, okay, she's a comedy queen, but as I've mentioned before, the season is filled with a lot of dancers. It's probably going to be a very performance-heavy based season. Nehellenia was top 2 for the Rusical and won the makeover. She is a comedy queen, but that is a disservice to her to only say she's a comedy queen. This bitch can do it all, and she is going to do it all, and I am ready. I'm excited. Holy shit, am I ready for Nehellenia to demolish. Pythia, her name's Pythia, and she's here to represent all the French Canadians out there. This is going to sound wild, but in my opinion, Canada is still an underrated franchise. And given that it's one of the most popular franchises, I think that's saying a lot to the quality of the queens that are on Canada. There are so many queens I would love to see back from this franchise. I could easily list them all here, but I would list nearly every single queen on out of the 4 seasons. So instead, I'm just going to say, give us a Canada All-Stars. It would be great. And that's not even to mention the queens we have seen back already. Like Jimbo, Lemon, Rita. But I do think Pythia is such a good choice for this season. Pythia excelled at pretty much every challenge, even the ones that you wouldn't have expected her to, like Snatch Game. The only challenge she done bad in was the roast, and she did do bad in the roast. In my opinion, she was bottom 2 for the roast, but I'm glad she wasn't, because we got one of the cringiest, worst lip syncs ever, with Kimura being in the bottom. But yeah, Pythia doing good in Snatch Game, winning the ball, etc. Again, a versatile queen. Also, did nearly every queen on this season win a makeover? I'm finding myself saying that a lot. But where I think Pythia stands out is the fact that the race for the crown between Pythia and Isis is maybe the closest a drag race has ever been, where it was only decided in the finale. I think the only other season I can think that was even as close as this was season 3 with Manila and Raja. Canada 2 easily could have been a double crowning, and I would have been ecstatic, and I don't think much other people would have minded either. But the opportunity to see Pythia perform again is worth her not winning, so I'm not going to be mad. I'm glad she is back. I love this queen so much. I think she's going to do well, and I'm so happy to see her back. Also, on a quick side note, I am so ready for there to be a French-speaking alliance on this season with Sua, Pythia, Athena, and I think Tessa also said that she speaks French. Maybe other people do as well. And within that alliance, to have a Greek-speaking alliance of Athena and Pythia. And since there isn't a Drag Race Greece, they don't know how to translate the Greek-speaking, and they're just openly backstabbing them, the other queens in the alliance. I don't know if this is going to be a thing. This is purely fan fiction at this point, but holy god, do I want it, because I think it would be hysterical. Next in meine Lieblings ist Tessa Testicle auf dem Drag Race Germany. I promise I won't speak German at all in the rest of the video. Germany is another cast I think is pretty great, but unlike the other casts, I actually think it was pretty easy to narrow down who I would want to see represent Germany. As I said before, this isn't my favorites from the season. It's who represents the home country the best while having the ability to mesh with different countries, while also being able to stand out. And for me, there were 2 queens I think I would have been happy with from Germany, that being Tessa and Kelly Hilton. Let's start with Kelly first. Incredibly congenial, hilarious. She won the Snatch Game, but also had a point of view. Her ball is incredibly captivating and moving. Being able to win Snatch Game and the ball is an incredibly rare achievement. There's a reason why Gottmik was celebrated so much for doing that, and it's because it doesn't happen often. And Kelly was just a bright spot in the season all the time. I always loved seeing her on my screen. And I think she should have gone further in the competition. And considering she came 4th, I'm not saying who I think should not have been in the finale, but Kelly should have been in that finale, and I think could have won the season. Now, Tessa. I think Tessa is an incredibly interesting choice, but she's also good representation for Drag Race Germany. She's not too serious. She has a good fashion sense where she done well. She was in the top for the design challenge on episode 2. She's a performer. She done 4 or 5 lip syncs. Sending home 3 different queens, getting a double save. No, she sent home 2 different people, double save, and then was eliminated. Whatever. She's a good lip syncer. And like Kelly, she also has a really endearing energy. Where Tessa stands out, though, is potential. As I said before, we saw in the design challenge and her lip syncs, she's incredibly talented. And while her time on Germany may not have been the right time for her to perform, I am confident in saying that she had one of the best promo looks and she had the best to meet the queens. I want to see a lot of Germany come back. You can ask me on a random day. I would probably have a different answer for who I would want to see back most. But Tessa is the queen in this cast I'm most excited to see because she wasn't on as long as everyone else in the cast. Besides Alyssa, everyone in this cast is finalists. Tessa came 8th. There is a lot that we haven't seen from her, and I'm ready to see what she can do now that she seems fully realized. She seems a lot more confident, and there has been a moment I am so ready for. I am ready for her to walk into the workroom, introduce herself, and for Alyssa to react to her name in the confessional. Alyssa to ask her, look around the room, who would be the 3? And then for Tessa to dominate the competition. Again, fan fiction, but I don't think it's unrealistic. I think Tessa has a lot of potential going into this competition, and I'm ready for it. I'm ready. I think she's going to have a real underdog story going on, which is why I could also see her making the finale. Nehellenia is being underestimated by the fan base at the minute. I think Tessa is going to be underestimated by the other competitors. And the 2 of them making the finale, I think, is going to be more likely than people realize. So, finally, we have Vanity Vain, who, again, is the correct choice. Sweden is actually a really weird season to talk about in this context because a lot of the cast is either from different countries or they live in different countries or their style is representative of different places. Like Antonina being from Liverpool, Indigo living in Tokyo, Fontana being from Brazil, etc. The cast does get cut down a fair bit if we're looking at who represents Sweden. And from who's left, Vanity is a very high quality queen. She has conceptual fashions. I really like her 3-headed look. She made it far into the competition. She got 3rd place. And in that, she had easily one of the best verses for a finale verse that we have seen in Drag Race. When watching Sweden, it's clear Vanity is going to make it to the end. She has a very similar energy to Admira, in my opinion, which is unapologetically Scandinavian. And I don't really have any other words for it. Vanity, I think, just really represents Drag Race Sweden. There is another choice who, if I wasn't focusing on who's good to represent the country, I would probably choose, and that is Fontana. Fontana is an amazing queen. She was who I wanted to win the season. But I don't think she's a good representation for Sweden. That's not an insult, but when it comes to comparing what Fontana done on Sweden, it's extremely similar to Victoria Shakespeare's on Drag Race Germany or Abby Oh My God on Drag Race Holland, where I feel like they brought Brazil to those countries, and they all done it well. Do not get me wrong, I do not mean this as an insult or a critique. As a foreigner living in a different country, I know the importance and significance of holding on to your home country. But for Global All Stars, I do think it is important to represent the home country of the franchise. And while all these queens do make Brazil such a big part of their drag, I'm hesitant to choose them for the franchise that they were on. But then, why not choose them to represent Drag Race Brazil? Well, they weren't on Drag Race Brazil, and I haven't seen that, so I don't know if that would be fair. It would be similar to, say, Lolita Banana representing Drag Race Mexico. Kinda. Like, she was on France. That would be the franchise she would have to represent, I think. Who knows? Another thing I may hear you say is, why are Athena and Pythia good choices for Canada and Belgium, where they were immigrants with Greek roots in their drag? And for as I said, these queens weren't on Brazil. Let the queens that went on Brazil represent Brazil. But B, there is something extremely unapologetically Brazilian in these queens' drag. There's flamboyance, there's color, and these queens contrast very heavily with the stoic and more reserved style of drag in the countries they competed in, where Pythia and Athena, their Greek influences didn't act in contrast, but more complemented the French Canadian and Brazilian, Belgian styles of drag, respectively. That's not to say I want all three of the previous queens, Fontana, Abby, and Victoria, all to come back at some point. So we've reached the end of all the queens that I can talk about who are on Global All Stars. But it's not the end of the video, so let's talk about two more franchises which aren't on this season, who I would like to see represented. That also makes up for me not talking about a couple of the queens, and that is Drag Race Spain and Holland as a treat. Now, with Spain, I'm spoiled for choice. Those first three seasons had so many excellent queens that it was hard to choose. But that's the point of the video, so let me do one per season. Excluding those that are on Spanish All-Stars, because that does cut out a fair amount of them, Jurichi would have been my choice for season 2 otherwise. With season 1, I would go with Killer Queen. With season 2, I would go with Bendita. And with season 3, I would go with Bestia. All these queens stand out on their original seasons. Killer stood out against the other comedy queens like Poopy by also having really good fashions. It's the reason why she won Snatch Game, because Snatch Game was also a ball episode, and that's the reason why Poopy lost, and that's the reason why Killer won. And also, in my opinion, Killer should have won the final comedy set challenge. Don't at me. Season 2, Benedita. She was so consistent. I love someone being so unapologetically sexual and owning it. And knowing how to use it to their advantage. Like the Fuego lip sync. A song which should have won Eurovision as well, but that's not here or there. Which should have been a low point, but was easily one of her most memorable points of the season. But in saying that, she also knew when to rein it in. For example, with the makeover, it wasn't a very sexual performance. It was actually really conceptual, and I really liked it. Also, on Espana, we tend to have alt queens who would be just as successful on Dragula as they were on Drag Race. For example, Hugo, Onyx, and my choice for season 3, Bestia. I think it's important for a choice to represent that kind of high fashion draggy horror, which seems to be a staple in Spanish drag, and if it's not, then the casting directors of Spain are just really good at choosing diversity. And Bessia, I think, does the best at kind of doing the horror stuff while keeping it really draggy. That's not to say anything of the other two, but looking at some of Onyx's stuff, it does look fucking incredible, but it doesn't give drag queen. Well, it doesn't give drag performer. It gives movie alien, which incredible talent. But to represent Drag Race on Drag Race, you still need drag in there. And finally, let's have a quick run through of Holland. Before I mentioned that Belgium and Canada were some of the hardest choices for me because I love them as franchises, Holland, I think, is my favorite franchise, so it was the hardest choice. I love every single queen that has been on Holland, and I think it's harder to choose given that the show has been cancelled and the host was not great. Fred is my least favorite host to be on Drag Race, and he could be kind of rude to the queens throughout the seasons. Jenny has said that Google Translate was involved in the translations for the seasons, but Fred just didn't fill me with good vibes. He was a bit off. Anyway, when it comes to the queens that were on the show, I am spoiled for choice. My first two choices were Jenny and Kata, and they've already came back. Jenny and Kata are probably two of my most favorite drag queens to be on any season of Drag Race, full stop. I find both of them incredible. I love them both so much. I've had the pleasure of meeting both of them, and they're such lovely people as well. So sadly, can't choose either of them. So we'll go with my second choices, which are Chelsea Boy and My Little Pony for season 1 and season 2, respectively. Chelsea Boy has some of the most incredible looks ever. And given her run on the season where she was just high every single episode until she was eliminated, it felt like, as I mentioned before, the judging on Holland wasn't great. But Chelsea needs her moment. Give her moment. And with My Little Pony, again, a queen that just done so well throughout the season. She was a performer. She won the improv challenge with Kata. Yeah, I want to see Penny back as well. And that's it for the video. Who do you want to do well in this season? Personally, I can't wait for a top 4 of Tessa, Nehellenia, Kween Kong, and Alyssa Edwards. And for Tessa and Nehellenia to be screaming and acting insane, with Alyssa just spouting off catchphrases in Kween Kong to be like, what the fuck is going on? It's going to be an excellent season. I'm so excited. I can't wait. And yeah, I'll see you in the next one.